Hi guys, welcome back to another Unity tutorial. My name is Devin, and today we're going to be continuing where we left off with our platformer game tutorial series. If you haven't seen the previous videos of this series, go ahead and click on these buttons on the screen, or follow the links in the description below. In this episode, we're going to be adding in player damage and death. So as you can see on the screen right now, the player will touch an enemy, will start to blink, take 1 point of damage, and become invincible for a short time. Once we take 3 points of damage, the game restarts, the player goes back to his starting position, and so do all the enemies. Now before we get started making this thing, don't forget to like and subscribe, follow me on Twitter, all that stuff, so you get the latest updates whenever I publish a new tutorial video. Plus it helps out the channel and I appreciate it. So without further ado, let's get started. So when we last left off, we had the enemy moving back and forth on a platform forever, which is great. But before I begin with the player versus enemy combat, let me show you a few issues that we need to fix first. So if we have two of these guys, they'll actually collide with each other and prevent each other from moving. And the second issue is if I butt up against them and move and jump at the same time, I can flip them. So you see they kind of rotated a bit. That can get into some nasty situations where, like, say this guy accidentally rotated to be like that, he'll start freaking out. So we don't want that to happen. So let's go ahead and fix those real quick. Alright, so the first off, the rotation, really easy to fix. Go down to the rigid body 2D component and check freeze rotation, and now he won't be able to rotate. He'll stay upright no matter what. The second issue of these two guys colliding with each other is that we need to adjust their physics layer. So they're already both set to the enemy layer right here, and to make the enemies, anything on the enemy layer not collide with anything else on the enemy layer, we need to go to Edit, Project Settings, Physics 2D, and then right here where it says Enemy and Enemy, where those two cross, we need to uncheck that. So now if we play, you see that they pass right through each other, and if I do that thing to rotate, well, okay, so the player is on the enemy layer for some reason. Let's go ahead and change that back to the player layer. You're a player. Let's see if that messed up our player mask at all. Yeah, it did. Alright, so we want to recheck enemy and uncheck player. If I try that again, then I shouldn't be able to rotate them when I do this. Yeah, so he didn't rotate at all. He did jump up a little bit, but he did not rotate. Alright, now let's start getting into the player combat, or player versus enemy combat. I'm gonna go ahead and make another one of these right down there. And let's go ahead and make a damaged animation for our player. So I just hit Control-6 to bring up the animation editor on our player art, and I'm going to create a new clip, and I'll save it in animations, and I'll call it alpha blink, because when he takes damage, I just want him to blink in the alpha channel of his sprite for a bit. Yeah, so let's go ahead and hit that record button and put that alpha at 0 or 1 for now, and then move it down to 0. Copy that over here, and if we play that, you can see he blinks really fast when he's damaged, or he's going to blink really fast when he's damaged. Yeah, so next let's go into the animator tab. We don't want to put the alpha blink on this root animator layer. We're going to want to make a new layer for the alpha blink, and we're going to call it our hurt layer. So go to this layers tab, hit the plus sign, and call it hurt, or whatever you want to call it. Also, click on this gear and change the blending from override to additive, and keep the weight at 0. You'll see how this works in a second. So yeah, let's go to animations, alpha blink. So if I hit play, you see this alpha blink is just going on, looping forever. And on the base layer, we have our normal move, walk, jump stuff. And then if I change the weight of this to be 1, then you see we blink. And then while this is 1, we could still play all our other animations while that blink animation is playing. So in order to use that animation that we just made, let's go ahead and edit our animator controller script and our player controller script. First, let's go with the player controller. Alright, so in here we're going to add a few new variables. Let's go ahead and move these down. Comment that with these are movement variables and these are combat variables. Alright, so in our combat variables we're going to make one for health. And let's just set that to 3 for now. You can change it to be whatever you want. Let's also make another public float for his invincibility frames. So this is how long we want him to blink and show that he's hurt before going back to the normal state. And during that time we're going to want him to not take damage from the enemies. So I'm going to call it the invincible time after hurt. Let's set that to 2 seconds. Alright, so let's go ahead and make a new function. And this new function is just one of the built-in Unity functions called onCollision enter 2D. And it takes an argument of collision 2D. I'll call that collision. And let's open it up. So in here what we're going to want to do, this is going to be whenever the player collides with another collider. So we've got on our player, we've got a box collider and a circle collider. So whenever one of those colliders collides with something else, say the ground or an enemy, then this function is going to be called. And the collision 2D that it passes us is going to have a whole bunch of information in it about the collision that we just hit. So one thing it gives us is the collider of the other object in the collision. So we're going to want to check to see if that collider belongs to an enemy. So one way to do that is we can make an enemy variable of type enemy, which is going to be this enemy class that we wrote earlier in the tutorial series. And we'll just call it enemy equals collision.collider. So in this collision, the collider that we hit get its component of type enemy. And if the enemy component exists on the game object whose collider that we hit, then enemy will be set to something. But if it's not set to something, then it will be set to null. So we want to check if enemy does not equal null. Then in here, this is where we want to do all of the logic for we hit the enemy or the enemy hit us. For now, let's just go ahead and say the enemy hit us, always. So we're not going to be able to hurt the enemy just yet. Let's go ahead and call our hurt function, which we haven't written yet. Whoops. And let's go ahead and write the hurt function for the player. Alright, so in this hurt function, we're going to want to take our health and decrease it by 1. So our health variable that we made up here, it starts out 3, then it gets to 1, or 2, 1, 0, and then we die. So then the next thing that we want to check is after we take our damage, if our health is less than or equal to 0, then we want to die. And for death, let's just say application.loadLevel. LoadLevel. Application.loadedLevel. So what this means is if our health reaches 0 or less, then Unity is going to reload our current level, so it's going to restart the game effectively. So first, to be able to let our application load this level, we're first going to have to add it to our build settings. And we can get to the build settings from either File Build Settings or Control-Shift-B on the keyboard. And with our scene that we want loaded in Unity, we could hit Add Current, and it'll add it right there. Or we can grab any number of scenes from a project view and drag it into our build settings. But for now, we just need this one level. So if I touch an enemy 3 times, the game should restart. So let's see, there's 1, 2, whoops, okay, I guess I hit him 3 times there, so. Alright, so it's possible that we were hitting him twice because we have two colliders with different shapes, so it's possible that the circle hit him and then the rectangle, the box collider, hit him. But anyway, we're going to fix that real quick once we add in our invincibility frames. In this function, we're not going to want to just like only do something if we reach 0 health. We're also going to want to play our blinking animation. And let's go ahead and make our blinking animation, our blinking function, our invincibility we just got hurt function in our player animator. So we can call it. So let's call this a public void trigger hurt. Alright, and in our player controller, let's go ahead and say myAnim.triggerHurt. Alright, so now let's go back to the animator controller. And in our trigger hurt function, we're going to want to do a few things. We're going to want to make the player layer ignore any more collisions from the enemy layer, wait a few seconds, wait our invincibility time after hurt amount of seconds, and then re-enable the collision and stop the blinking. In order to do that time-based thing where we have to wait a few seconds, we're going to need to make an enumerator. So let's go ahead and make a new enumerator called hurt blinker. And then in trigger hurt, let's just say start coroutine hurt blinker, or whoops, yeah, hurt blinker. Alright, so from player controller, when we call trigger hurt, it's actually going to kick off this coroutine right here. So there's a few things we're going to want to do. Just like I said before, we're going to want to ignore the collision between enemies and players, and then we're going to want to start the looping blink animation, and then we're going to want to wait, and then we're going to want to stop the blinking animation and re-enable collision. Alright, let's go ahead and actually write out these functions. So first we're going to want to get the enemy layer for here and the player layer, and these come in as integers. Alright, so first off, real quick, we're getting this red squiggly line because an enumerator expects us to wait for a certain amount of seconds, so let's go ahead and add in the wait function right now. So the way that we wait is we're going to say yield, come on man, yield return new wait for seconds, and let's actually pass it in as a variable right here. So we'll say hurt time right here, and we'll pass it in here and here and here. And then let's go back to player controller real quick and go ahead and take that guy and plug him in there. Alright, perfect. Now let's go back to the animator controller and pick up where we left off with finding the enemy layer. To get the enemy layer, we type in layer mask dot name to layer, and as you can see right here by the tooltip, it returns an integer right here, so that's why we made an integer type variable. And then it takes in an argument of the layer name, and our layer name is enemy. And we're going to need to do the same thing, but for the player layer. And again, these layers are the things that we set up in Unity up here for the enemy and the player. Alright, and then once we have those, we're going to make those two layers ignore each other. So that's in the physics 2D class, and then we call ignore layer collision, and then we pass in the integers of the two layers that we want to ignore each other. So that's the enemy layer and the player layer. And let's go ahead and copy that function, bring it back down here where we're going to re-enable it, and pass in one more variable. The last variable is an optional variable called ignore. Defaults to true, so this one will be true, ignore each other, and then here we're going to say false, don't ignore each other. Don't ignore each other anymore. And then also, of course, we're going to want to add in our blinking animation. So in here to start the looping animation, what we're going to have to do is get a reference to our animator, which we already have, and then say myAnim.set weight, set layer, yeah, set layer weight, and then we're going to have to pass in a layer index, which the base layer is layer index 1, and hert will be layer index, or no, this is index 0 and index 1. So let's go ahead and pass the 1 as our index, and set the weight to also be 1. So this will start the blinking, and let's go ahead and copy that, bring it back down here, and stop the blinking by setting the layer weight back to 0. Alright, let's go ahead and give this a try. Oops, looks like we got a compiler error. Ah yes, missed parentheses right there. Let's go back and try it again. Alright, so now if I hit a guy, I start to blink, and I actually don't ignore his collision until we step back and try and hit him again. So a quick little hack to fix that is to grab all of the colliders in our player. Let's see if we have a reference to those already. We do not, but we can make one. So let's go ahead and get a reference to all of our colliders. We'll call these collider 2D. It'll be an array, and we'll call it myCols. Alright, so to get myCols in here, we'll just say myCols on start equals this dot get component. Oops, don't need that many. And say collider 2D. So now we've got a reference to all of the colliders, which is our box collider right here and our circle collider right here. So we get a reference to all those guys. And to be able to reference this quickly and easily in our animator controller, I'm going to go ahead and make a public static variable called instance of type player controller, called instance. There we go. And then also in start, we're just going to say instance equals this. So what that does is at the beginning of the game, on start, we're going to get a reference to this script, this class, and plug it into instance. So the player, as soon as the game starts, this script right here, this instance of that script, is going to be plugged into this variable right here that we just made. And since it's public static, we can access it from any class, for example the animator controller class, by saying player controller dot instance, and now we have a reference to it. And now we can grab any of the public variables from it, such as myCols, which is not public but will be. And actually we don't want this to be visible in the inspector because this is only going to be accessed through script, so we're going to call it hide in inspector, give it an hide in inspector tag right there. Now we can access it through here with myCols. And the reason that we're going to do this, back to the reason why we're doing all this, the hack to fix this issue, where he continues to collide with the enemy, is after the first hit that that collision is just going to stay. So we're going to have to disable all of his colliders and then re-enable them all really quick, all within the same frame. So it's not going to affect gameplay at all, it's just going to fix this little bug. So we're going to say for each collider 2D, whoops, collider in the player controller's colliders. So the box and the circle colliders are each going to have this happen to them, which is collider dot enabled equals false. So we're going to turn them off, and then we're going to turn them back on right away. So that'll just refresh the collision and allow us to walk through the enemy rather than get stuck on him. So now if he runs into me, he can pass right through me and I'm still hurt by him. Boop. Maybe let's increase the invincibility time to 3 instead. Actually, that might be too long, but anyway, you get the idea. Alright, so that sums it up for our player getting hurt. We can now have our player get hurt and restart the level and all that good stuff. So I'm hurt, ouch, owie, and I take 3 hits and the level restarts. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if this is helpful, and stay tuned for the next part of this series where we will finish the enemy versus player combat and actually let the player kill the enemy. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you next time.